She was counting the seconds. 18, 19, 20. That's how long it took for her entire world to shatter in front of 300 students at Westbrook Preparatory Academy. But what they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Riley Carter had been counting seconds her whole life. And this time, when she stopped counting, 3 boys would hit the floor. The sound of ripping fabric echoed through the crowded hallway like a gunshot at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday that would change everything. Riley's white sundress, the one her father had bought her for her 16th birthday, tore from shoulder to waist with the cruel precision of a predator marking territory. 300 phones rose like digital weapons, recording every second of what they thought would be another victim's humiliation. But Riley Carter didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't run. Instead, something shifted in her stance, something that made Coach Patterson, watching from his office doorway, mutter a single word under his breath: dangerous. If you've ever felt that moment when everything changes, when you realize you're done being silent and ready to reclaim your power, you'll understand what happened next. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find the courage to share your own moment of transformation in the comments below. Because what unfolded in that hallway wasn't just about one girl's revenge. It was about the moment silence transforms into strength, and victims discover they were warriors all along. 3 weeks earlier, Riley Carter had been nobody, just another transfer student trying to disappear into the prestigious halls of Westbrook Prep. She'd moved here with her mother after everything fell apart in Colorado Springs, after the nightmares started, after the therapy sessions that never seemed to end. The official story was simple military family relocating after her father's death in Afghanistan. Clean, sympathetic, designed to generate just enough pity to keep people from asking deeper questions. The truth was far more complicated. Riley's phone buzzed during her third-period chemistry class, a text from her best friend Stella back in Colorado Springs. "How's Texas treating you?" it read, but Riley could hear the real question underneath. "Are you hiding again?" She slipped the phone under her desk, typing back quickly. Still counting seconds, but getting stronger. "Like Colorado Springs," came Stella's immediate response. Riley's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Colorado Springs had been different. There, she'd been genuinely helpless, genuinely trapped. Here at Westbrook, surrounded by trust fund kids and legacy admissions, she was something else entirely. Something her new classmates couldn't see yet. "Worse," she finally typed. "This time they have real power." "Then maybe it's time to stop running," Stella replied. Riley glanced around the chemistry lab, taking in the expensive equipment, the perfectly manicured students, the teacher who looked like she'd stepped out of a country club brochure. Everything here screamed privilege and protection. "Dad said violence isn't the answer," she texted back. "Your dad also said, protect yourself by any means necessary." Ms. Patricia Williams, the chemistry teacher, noticed Riley's distraction. "Miss Carter, perhaps you'd like to join us for the acid demonstration." Riley pocketed her phone and straightened, her movement containing a fluidity that caught several students' attention. "Yes, ma'am. Which type of acid are we working with?" "Hydrochloric. Quite dangerous if mishandled." Ms. Williams's eyes lingered on Riley for a moment longer than necessary, something almost knowing in her gaze. From the back of the class, Bryce Thornton watched this exchange with growing interest. Star lacrosse captain, Princeton bound, son of federal judge Robert Thornton. Bryce had ruled Westbrook's social hierarchy since freshman year. He'd noticed the new girl immediately, not because she was particularly striking, but because she moved wrong. Too careful, too aware, like someone expecting trouble. Bryce had been dealing with his own troubles lately. His father's embezzlement investigation had been kept quiet, buried under layers of legal privilege and family connections. But the pressure was building. The kind of pressure that made a young man desperate to maintain control wherever he could find it. "Austin," he whispered to the boy beside him, never taking his eyes off Riley. "What do you know about the new girl, Austin Reed? All muscle and minimal brain." Shrugged. "Transfer from Colorado. Military family. Father died overseas or something." He paused, considering. "Heard she's on scholarship." The scholarship detail hit Bryce like a revelation. Scholarship meant vulnerable. Scholarship meant dependent on the school's goodwill. Scholarship meant controllable. Riley, focused on the demonstration, didn't notice the predatory attention. She was busy studying Ms. Williams's technique, noting the teacher's precise movements, the way she held herself. There was something familiar about the woman's posture, something that reminded Riley of her father's friends from his Special Forces days. "Miss Carter," Ms. Williams called, startling her from observation. "Would you like to assist with the next part of the demonstration?" Riley approached the lab bench, her steps measured and controlled. Ms. Williams handed her a beaker of acid, their fingers brushing for just a moment. "Careful," the teacher said softly, but Riley caught something else in her tone recognition. That's when Bryce made his move. "Oops," he said loudly, deliberately knocking over his water bottle so it rolled toward the demonstration table. As Riley reached to stop it, Bryce accidentally bumped the lab bench, sending the acid beaker tilting dangerously toward her hands. What happened next defied explanation for anyone watching. Riley moved, but not like a normal person avoiding danger. She flowed, pivoting on her left foot while simultaneously shifting her weight and pulling her hands back, in a movement so precise, so practiced, that every drop of acid missed her skin by millimeters. The beaker shattered on the floor, acid hissing against the tiles, but Riley remained perfectly balanced, breathing controlled, eyes locked on Bryce with an intensity that made him take an unconscious step backward. "Impressive reflexes," he said, trying to regain his composure. "Where'd you learn to move like that?" Riley's smile was carefully neutral. "YouTube," she lied smoothly. "Lots of accident prevention videos." But Ms. Williams, cleaning up the spilled acid, had seen something else entirely. That hadn't been accident avoidance, that had been combat training. The incident in chemistry class marked the beginning of what Bryce would later call his biggest mistake. Over the following days, he tested Riley's boundaries with the methodical approach of a predator sizing up prey. Small things at first, bumping into her in hallways, making comments about scholarship students, organizing his friends to spread rumors about her father's real death. Riley documented everything: phone recordings, screenshots, witness names, timestamps. Her father had taught her that information was ammunition, and she was building an arsenal. The escalation came during lunch on a Wednesday. Riley sat alone in the cafeteria, as she had every day since arriving, when Bryce decided to make his move public. He approached her table with Austin and Kent Morrison, his other loyal follower, creating a triangle of intimidation around her seat.
"So, Riley," Bryce announced, loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear, "I've been wondering about your father."
Hero in Afghanistan. Right. Must be tough, having those daddy issues. Riley's grip tightened on her sandwich, but her voice remained steady. "My father was a good man who served his country." "Was," Bryce emphasized, smirking. "Past tense. Because he's not coming back. Question is, did he die fighting the enemy or fighting his own demons?" The cafeteria had gone quiet, students sensing drama. Riley felt the familiar sensation of being watched, judged, measured for weakness. But this time, something was different. This time, she felt the weight of her training, the muscle memory her father had drilled into her during thousands of hours in their garage dojo. "You don't know anything about my father," she said quietly. "I know enough," Bryce continued, pulling out his phone. "See, I did some research, found some interesting articles about military PTSD, suicide rates, families torn apart by war trauma." He swiped through screenshots, each one a knife twist designed to break her. That's when Grace Winters appeared. Grace was a sophomore, mousy brown hair, nervous energy, the kind of girl who usually faded into Westbrook's background. But she walked directly to Riley's table, ignoring Bryce's glare, and sat down without invitation. "Bryce," Grace said, her voice shaking but determined, "you might want to stop talking." "Excuse me." Bryce's attention shifted. Threat assessment calculating. Grace had never challenged him before, never even spoken to him directly. "I said you might want to stop." Grace pulled out her own phone, fingers trembling but purposeful. "Because I have video of what you did to Amanda Morrison last year at the spring formal. You remember Amanda? Right, Kent's sister." Kent's face went pale. "Grace, don't what?" Grace's confidence was building, fed by Riley's silent support. "Don't tell everyone how Bryce followed Amanda into the bathroom. Don't mention the bruises she had to cover with makeup for weeks. Don't talk about how your family paid her family $50,000 to keep quiet." The cafeteria erupted in whispers. Bryce's carefully maintained image, built on athletic success and family influence, cracked visibly. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." Grace stood, still shaking, but no longer hiding. "And I know that if you keep pushing Riley, if you keep hurting people, I'm going to make sure everyone sees that video." Bryce looked between Grace and Riley, recognizing something he'd never encountered before: coordinated resistance. These weren't isolated victims to be picked off one by one. They were organizing. "This isn't over," he said, backing away from the table. Riley waited until he was gone before turning to Grace. "Thank you. But you didn't have to." "Yes, I did," Grace interrupted. "I should have done it last year. I should have done it when it happened to Jennifer Marsh and Katie Bishop and all the others, but I was too scared." "What changed?" Grace looked at Riley, really looked at her, taking in the controlled posture, the alert eyes, the subtle signs of someone who'd been trained to fight. "You did. The way you moved in chemistry class, the way you didn't break when he attacked your father's memory. You're not like the rest of us." Riley considered her words carefully. The secret she'd been guarding, the reason for her family's real relocation, pressed against her chest like a physical weight. "What makes you think that, because I've seen real victims, Riley? I've been one. And you." Grace's smile was knowing, almost admiring. "You're something else entirely." That afternoon, Riley found herself in the most dangerous place at Westbrook, the girls' locker room after hours. When the supervision disappeared and the real power dynamics emerged, she'd stayed late for a chemistry makeup session with Ms. Williams and was gathering her things when they cornered her. Bryce, Austin, and Kent blocked the exit, their positioning professional, practiced. This wasn't their first time trapping someone in an isolated space. "Thought you were clever today," Bryce said, advancing slowly. "Getting your little friend to threaten me. But here's what you don't understand about Westbrook. Scholarship girl. Grace Winters isn't going to save you. Her family needs their financial aid just as much as yours does. And my father, he sits on the board that approves that aid. Riley backed against the lockers, but her breathing remained controlled. Deep, measured, the rhythm her father had taught her for managing pre-combat adrenaline. "What do you want, Bryce?" "Submission," he said simply. "I want you to understand your place here. I want you to apologize for embarrassing me. I want you to convince Grace to delete whatever she thinks she has. And I want you to remember that scholarship students exist here at our pleasure." Austin cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing off the tile walls. "And if you don't cooperate, accidents happen. Girls get hurt. Sometimes they get hurt bad enough that they have to transfer schools." "Sometimes," Kent added, his voice barely above a whisper, "they get hurt bad enough that they stop going to school altogether." Riley's stance shifted almost imperceptibly, weight settling onto the balls of her feet, hands moving to a position that looked casual but wasn't. "Are you threatening me? I'm educating you." Bryce stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with sweat, and something else, fear. She realized he was afraid, which made him more dangerous than arrogance alone ever could. "My father taught me about education," Riley said, her voice steady despite the three boys looming over her. "He said the most important lesson was knowing when someone was trying to teach you something, and when they were trying to break you." "What's that supposed to mean?" Riley met his eyes, and for just a moment, Bryce saw something that made his confidence waver. Something cold, calculated, completely unafraid. "It means I've been counting seconds again, Bryce, and I think our education is about to begin." That's when Austin made his mistake. Emboldened by Riley's apparent passivity, he reached out to grab her arm, to pin her against the lockers like they'd done to so many girls before. Riley moved. The world slowed down as 3 weeks of careful planning, months of documented harassment, and years of suppressed training collided in a single moment of perfect clarity. Austin's hand never reached her arm. Instead, Riley's left hand caught his wrist, redirected his momentum, and used his own strength to send him stumbling into the lockers with a metallic crash that echoed through the empty space. "What the hell?" Kent started, but Riley was already moving, flowing around Austin's falling body, positioning herself between the three boys and the exit. "You made one mistake," she said, her voice carrying a new authority that made all three boys freeze. "You assumed I was a victim." Bryce stared at her, taking in her changed posture, her balanced stance, the way she held herself like someone who'd been trained to fight. "What are you?" Riley smiled, and this time there was nothing careful or neutral about it. "I'm Riley Carter. My father was Master Sergeant James Carter, Special Forces, 3 tours in Afghanistan, Silver Star recipient, and 3rd-degree black belt. Before he died, he spent 5 years teaching me everything he knew about protecting myself." The boys exchanged glances, suddenly uncertain. This wasn't going according to their usual script. "But more than that," Riley continued, never taking her eyes off Bryce, "I'm done being quiet. Done pretending to be helpless. Done letting you terrorize girls who can't fight back. You're crazy if you think," Austin started, pushing himself off the lockers. "I think," Riley interrupted, "that you're going to walk away. You're going to leave me alone. You're going to leave Grace alone. You're going to leave every girl in this school alone. Because if you don't—" Her stance shifted again, and suddenly she looked less like a high school student and more like her father's daughter. "You're going to discover that some lessons are more permanent than others." Bryce's face cycled through emotions: shock, anger, fear, and finally something dark and calculating. "You think this is over? You have no idea what kind of power my family has. No idea what we can do to scholarship students who don't know their place." "Try me," Riley said simply. The three boys left without another word, but Riley knew this was far from finished. She'd revealed her strength, shown her hand, declared war on an enemy with resources she could barely imagine. But as she stood alone in the locker room, heart still racing from her first real confrontation, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her father's death. She felt like herself again. What Riley didn't know, as she gathered her backpack and headed for the exit, was that everything had been recorded. The locker room's security camera, supposedly broken for the past 2 months, had been repaired that morning. And someone had been watching. Someone who'd been waiting 3 years for the right moment, the right person, the right situation to bring down Bryce Thornton and everything he represented. Ms. Patricia Williams sat in her empty classroom, watching the security footage on her laptop, and smiled for the first time since she'd started teaching at Westbrook Preparatory Academy. The new girl wasn't just trained, she was ready. And tomorrow, when Bryce Thornton decided to escalate his war against Riley Carter, he would discover that he'd chosen the wrong target. Because Riley Carter wasn't just her father's daughter. She was about to become Westbrook's reckoning. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of Texas weather that seemed to press down on everything with damp inevitability. Riley walked through Westbrook's main entrance at exactly 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes before first period, carrying herself with a new confidence that several students noticed but couldn't quite identify. She'd spent the night thinking about the locker room confrontation, replaying every moment, analyzing what it meant. For 3 weeks, she'd hidden her training, concealed her strength, played the role of helpless new girl. But now the mask was off, and there was no going back. Grace Winters waited by Riley's locker, clutching a manila folder against her chest like armor. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "About yesterday." Riley worked her combination, noting the way Grace positioned herself to watch the hallway, the nervous energy radiating from her small frame. "About everything." Grace opened the folder, revealing printed screenshots, newspaper clippings, and what looked like a typed timeline. "I wasn't lying about the video, Riley, but it's worse than I told Bryce. Much worse." Riley closed her locker, giving Grace her full attention. "Show me." They found an empty classroom, and Grace spread her evidence across 2 desks like a detective building a case. "Bryce Thornton has been systematically attacking girls at this school for 3 years. Not just harassment, not just verbal abuse, real assault, and every time his family makes it disappear." The documentation was extensive. Amanda Morrison's hospital records from the spring formal incident, Jennifer Marsh's transfer papers, dated 3 days after she'd filed a complaint against Bryce, Katie Bishop's therapy bills, covered by an anonymous donor that Grace had traced back to the Thornton Family Foundation. 12 girls, Grace said, her voice tight with suppressed rage. 12 that I know of. All silenced, all paid off, all transferred or graduated, or just plain disappeared from Westbrook's records. Riley studied the timeline, her father's analytical training helping her see the patterns. This isn't random. He's escalating, getting bolder, and the school knows. They have to know. The principal, the guidance counselors, the teachers. They all know what he's doing. But Judge Thornton donated $2 million for the new library, and his wife funded the entire arts program. Grace's laugh was bitter. Hard to bite the hand that feeds you. What changed? Riley asked. "Why are you willing to speak up now?" Grace was quiet for a long moment, staring at the evidence spread before them. "Because yesterday, in the locker room, I watched you refuse to be a victim, and I realized that I've been choosing to be one every day I stayed silent." Riley felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Grace was looking at her like a leader, like someone who could fix what was broken at Westbrook. But Riley knew something Grace didn't. She wasn't planning to stay at Westbrook long enough to fix anything. Her family's witness protection relocation was temporary, designed to keep her safe until certain legal proceedings concluded. She was supposed to keep her head down, avoid attention, survive until she could move again. "Grace," she began carefully, "I appreciate what you're doing, but there's more," Grace interrupted, pulling out her phone. "I've been documenting everything since freshman year. Every incident, every cover-up, every girl who got hurt and then disappeared." She swiped through folders full of videos, photos, recordings. "But I never had anyone strong enough to stand with me." The bell rang, signaling first period, but neither girl moved. They sat surrounded by evidence of institutional failure, of systematic predation, of a school more interested in donation checks than student safety. "What do you want from me?" Riley asked finally. "I want you to help me end this," Grace said. "Today, before he hurts anyone else." Riley thought about her promise to her mother, her commitment to staying invisible. She thought about the family that had already lost so much, that couldn't afford to lose more. But then she looked at Grace's determined face, at the files documenting years of silenced victims, and felt her father's voice in her memory. "Sometimes, baby girl, doing the right thing means risking everything." "What did you have in mind?" Grace's smile was sharp with anticipation. "Bryce always makes his big moves during lunch, in front of the biggest audience. He'll come for you today, probably in the main hallway where everyone can see. When he does, I'll be recording everything. But this time, we'll be ready." "Ready how?" "You showed me yesterday that you're not helpless. Today, I want you to show everyone else." Grace leaned forward, intensity radiating from her small frame. "I want you to stop pretending to be weak." Riley considered the proposal, weighing the risks against the potential benefits. If she fought back publicly, if she revealed the full extent of her training, there would be no more hiding. Her witness protection status would be compromised, her family's safety potentially threatened. But 12 girls had already been hurt, and more would follow if Bryce continued unchecked. "There's something else," Grace added, lowering her voice. "Ms. Williams asked me to give you this." She handed Riley a small piece of paper, folded twice. Riley opened it, finding a brief message in neat handwriting. "Third period chemistry. Stay after class. We need to discuss your father's real service record, PW." Riley stared at the note, ice forming in her stomach. How could Ms. Williams know about her father's classified background? How could she know that Master Sergeant James Carter's official record was a carefully constructed fiction? "Grace," she said slowly, "how well do you know Ms. Williams? She's been my academic advisor since freshman year. Why? Has she ever asked you about documenting harassment, about building cases against students?" Grace frowned, thinking. "Actually, yes. Last year, after the Amanda Morrison incident, she suggested I keep records, said evidence was important if I ever wanted to seek justice." The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture that both thrilled and terrified Riley. Ms. Williams wasn't just a chemistry teacher who'd noticed her martial arts training. She was someone with access to classified information. Someone who knew about Riley's real background. Someone who'd been preparing for exactly this moment. "Grace," Riley said, making her decision. "If we're going to do this, if we're really going to take down Bryce Thornton, we need to be smart about it." "What do you mean?" Riley thought about her father's lessons on tactical planning, about the importance of controlling the battlefield, about the difference between fighting and winning. "We need to make sure that when this ends, it ends permanently. No family money, no legal maneuvering, no disappearing evidence." "How do we do that?" "We make it impossible to ignore, impossible to cover up, impossible to explain away." Riley stood, feeling the familiar pre-combat calm settling over her. "And we make sure the whole world is watching when we do it." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of preparation. Riley attended her classes, took notes, participated in discussions, all while mentally rehearsing combat scenarios and legal strategies. Grace worked her own network, quietly alerting certain students, positioning phone cameras, ensuring maximum documentation. By 11:30 a.m., word had spread through Westbrook's gossip network that something was going to happen at lunch. The tension was palpable, crackling through hallways like electricity before a storm. Riley sat in third-period chemistry, watching Ms. Williams conduct the day's lesson with professional composure, waiting for the conversation that would either confirm her suspicions or reveal an entirely different game being played. When the bell rang, she remained in her seat as other students filed out. "Close the door, please," Ms. Williams said, not looking up from her gradebook. Riley did as instructed, then returned to her seat, studying her teacher with new eyes. Patricia Williams was in her 40s, athletic build, graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Nothing about her appearance suggested military background, but Riley had learned that appearances could be carefully constructed lies. "Your father," Ms. Williams began, still writing in her gradebook, "was Master Sergeant James Carter, Delta Force, Operation Neptune's Spear Support Team, recipient of the Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart. He died 18 months ago, not in Afghanistan, but in a psychiatric facility in Colorado Springs, after suffering a complete psychological break related to PTSD and survivor's guilt." Riley's hands clenched into fists. "How do you know that?" "Because I served with him." Ms. Williams looked up, meeting Riley's eyes. "Captain Patricia Williams? Army Intelligence, retired. I was his handler for 3 different operations, and when he started showing signs of instability, I was the one who recommended him for medical discharge." The classroom spun around Riley. Her father had never mentioned knowing any of his superior officers personally, had never suggested that his death was anything other than a random tragedy. "Why are you here? Why are you telling me this? Because 18 months ago, your father called me 3 days before he died. He told me about a daughter who was struggling, who was being targeted by predators, who needed protection and training, and someone to watch over her." Ms. Williams set down her pen, leaning forward with intensity. "He asked me to find you, Riley, to make sure you were safe. So, you got a job at my school. I got transferred to the school where I knew you'd eventually end up. Westbrook Prep has a reputation for attracting troubled military families, kids who need structure and privilege to heal from trauma. I've been waiting for you for over a year." Riley struggled to process this information. Her entire relocation, her careful placement at Westbrook, even her mother's choice of neighborhood, had all been orchestrated by someone watching from the shadows. "What do you want from me? I want to honor your father's memory by helping you become the woman he knew you could be." Ms. Williams stood, moving to the window that overlooked the main hallway. And I want to help you clean up this school while we're at it. Clean up how Bryce Thornton represents everything your father fought against. Privilege without responsibility. Power without accountability. Cruelty protected by money and connections. Ms. Williams turned back to Riley, her expression fierce. Your father spent his life protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Today, you have a chance to do the same. Riley felt the familiar weight of expectation, the burden of living up to a dead hero's legacy. What if I'm not ready? What if I make things worse? Your father taught you everything you need to know. Riley, trust your training, trust your instincts, and trust that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. The lunch bell rang, echoing through the empty classroom like a call to battle. Riley gathered her backpack, checking to make sure her phone was recording, that her evidence files were accessible, that she was mentally prepared for whatever came next. Riley, Ms. Williams called as she reached the door. Remember what your father always said about fighting? Riley paused, hand on the doorknob. Don't start fights you can't finish. And Riley's smile was sharp with anticipation. When you do fight, make sure it's worth remembering. She walked out of the chemistry classroom and toward the main hallway, where 300 students were gathering for the most important lunch period in Westbrook Preparatory Academy's history. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "He's here. Are you ready?" Riley typed back without breaking stride. "I've been ready my whole life." What she didn't know, as she walked toward her destiny in that crowded hallway, was that she wasn't just walking into a confrontation with Bryce Thornton. She was walking into a carefully orchestrated trap that would either destroy her completely or transform her into exactly the kind of person her father had always believed she could become. Either way, the counting was about to stop. The main hallway stretched before Riley like a gladiator's arena. 300 students lining the walls with phones raised, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Bryce Thornton stood at the center, flanked by Austin and Kent, his posture radiating the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "Well, well," Bryce announced, his voice carrying across the expectant silence. "Look who decided to join us. The scholarship princess herself." Riley walked forward steadily, her breathing controlled, her father's training flowing through muscle memory like water finding its course. Around her, she could feel the electric anticipation of a crowd hungry for drama, unaware they were about to witness justice. "I heard you've been spreading stories about me, Bryce," Riley said, stopping 20 feet away. "Stories about my father, about my family, about things you couldn't possibly understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly." Bryce's smile was cruel, calculated. "I understand that you're nothing special, just another broken kid from a broken family, trying to pretend you belong in our world." Grace Winters stood near the lockers, phone recording, her hands trembling but steady. Ms. Williams had positioned herself by the stairwell, ostensibly supervising but actually ensuring optimal camera angles. The trap was set, the stage prepared, the audience assembled. "You want to know what's special about me? Bryce." Riley's stance shifted subtly, weight settling onto the balls of her feet. "I'll show you." That's when Bryce made his fatal mistake. Emboldened by the crowd, drunk on his own perceived power, he lunged forward and grabbed the collar of Riley's white sundress, the same dress her father had given her, the same dress she'd worn to his funeral. The fabric tore with a sound like breaking bones, ripping from shoulder to waist. exposing her sports bra to 300 recording phones. The crowd gasped. Several students screamed, but Riley Carter didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled. "My father," she said, her voice carrying clear across the sudden silence, "was Master Sergeant James Carter, Delta Force, Silver Star recipient. He taught me two things. Bryce." She dropped into a perfect fighting stance, every line of her body speaking fluency in violence. How to fight, and when to fight. "You don't scare me," Bryce snarled, but his voice cracked slightly. "You mistake silence for weakness," Riley replied, her eyes cold as winter frost. "That was your first mistake." Austin charged first. All muscle and no strategy, throwing a wild haymaker that would have flattened most people. Riley ducked under his swing, caught his wrist, and used his own momentum to flip him over her hip in a textbook judo throw. He hit the floor with a crack that echoed off the lockers. 300 phones capturing every second. Kent tried to grab her from behind, but Riley sensed him coming, drove an elbow into his solar plexus, spun, and swept his legs. He collapsed, gasping. The fight driven out of him by a 17-year-old girl who moved like liquid lightning. Bryce faced her alone now, his confidence evaporating as he realized he wasn't fighting a victim. He was fighting someone who'd been trained by America's finest warriors. "This is for every girl you hurt," Riley said, advancing on him with predatory grace. "This is for every silence you bought, every crime you covered up, every life you damaged, because you thought power meant making others smaller." Bryce threw a desperate punch, but Riley caught his fist, twisted his arm, and sent him crashing to the floor beside his friends. 3 seconds, 3 boys down, 300 witnesses recording justice in high definition. Principal Anderson appeared, pushing through the crowd, but stopped when he saw Ms. Williams approaching with a briefcase and a badge. "FBI," she announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This entire incident has been recorded as part of an ongoing investigation into systematic harassment, assault, and obstruction of justice at this institution." Bryce stared up from the floor, blood trickling from his nose, his world crumbling around him. "You can't. My father—" "Your father," Ms. Williams replied calmly, "was arrested this morning on federal embezzlement charges. His protection can't help you anymore." The revelation rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Riley stood over her defeated enemies, her torn dress hanging off one shoulder, but her posture radiating strength rather than shame. "For 3 years," she announced, her voice reaching every corner of the hallway. "Bryce Thornton has terrorized girls at this school. Today, that ends. Not because I'm stronger than him, but because we're stronger together." Grace stepped forward, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. 17 victims have come forward with evidence. The FBI has everything, every cover-up, every payoff, every crime. She looked directly at Principal Anderson. "Change is coming to Westbrook, whether you want it or not." As sirens wailed outside, as news crews gathered in the parking lot, as the machinery of justice finally began to turn, Riley felt something she hadn't experienced since her father's death. Peace. She wasn't counting seconds anymore. She was counting allies, counting victories, counting the ways that one person's courage could inspire an army of others to find their voices. 6 months later, Riley stood in the same hallway, but everything had changed. Bryce Thornton was serving time in juvenile detention, his father in federal prison, his family's influence shattered beyond repair. Grace Winters led a thriving survivor support network. Ms. Williams had been promoted to head of a new campus safety initiative, and Westbrook Preparatory Academy had become a model for institutional accountability. A shy freshman named Emma Thompson approached Riley's locker, nervous but determined. "Excuse me, you're Riley Carter." "Right, I was wondering. If someone was bothering me, someone with power, would you help?" Riley closed her locker, looking at Emma with recognition and compassion. She saw herself in this girl's frightened eyes, saw every victim who'd ever been told to stay quiet, to accept abuse, to count seconds until the pain stopped. "I used to count seconds," Riley said gently, putting a protective arm around Emma's shoulders. 18, 19, 20. That's how long it took me to realize that silence isn't safety. "What is?" Emma asked. Riley smiled, looking around the hallway where dozens of students now wore pins reading "Break the Silence," where posters encouraged reporting, where victims had become survivors and survivors had become warriors. "Community," she said, leading Emma toward the support center that hadn't existed 6 months ago. "And knowing that when you stop counting seconds and start counting on each other, that's when real change begins." As they walked away, Riley's phone buzzed with a message from Stella back in Colorado Springs. "Saw the news coverage. Your dad would be proud." Riley typed back without hesitation. "I'm finally ready to stop hiding and start living." Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is break your own silence, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. When one person stops counting seconds and starts counting allies, when victims become warriors and warriors become leaders, that's when institutions crumble and justice rises from the ashes. Riley Carter had stopped counting, and in that space where fear used to live, she'd found something far more powerful, the strength to ensure that no one would ever have to count alone again. The hallway echoed with laughter now instead of whispers, with support instead of silence, with the sound of change that starts with a single voice brave enough to say, "Enough." And somewhere in that sound, Riley could swear she heard her father's voice, proud and strong and finally at peace. "That's my warrior."